Well, thank you again for staying with us. It's World Migratory Bird Day, an annual awareness-raising campaign highlighting the need for the conservation of migratory birds and their habitats. If you don't know what migratory birds are, well, we have someone who will tell us this morning. Dr. Stella Egbe is the Senior Conservation Manager, Species Programs, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. Thank you for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure being here.
What is a migratory bird?
Okay, within our shared ecosystem and space, you have some birds that have the genetic ability to jackpot. Let me use the context that we'll understand. So theirs is not just a decision, it's genetic. They breed in certain parts of the world when conditions are favorable. And when it becomes unfavorable, they have the ability to jackpot to areas where they can now spend time until they return to those places originally. So you have examples of birds that breed in Europe, for example. They have food within the summer, abundant warm weather, and they can reproduce. And then once the winter begins to set in, they move to other parts of the world, like sub-Saharan Africa and Nigeria.
Once the economy becomes hard, the jackpot.
The jackpot. And it's genetic. That's the wonderful thing about it. It's not a learned behavior. They inherit that ability to do that.
We didn't inherit it. We didn't inherit it either. What's the word that she used? It is also genetic for us to jackpot. It's genetic. For instance, people jackpot. We think jackpot is a straight thing. People jackpot from one job to another all the time.
Yeah.
Jackpot from one accommodation to another.
This pattern that you have described, has climate change affected it in any way? Have their patterns changed as a result of climate change?
Yeah, so interestingly, yes. There are observations being made because now you have climate mismatch. So a bird, for example, that is supposed to have abundant food in summer, you have climate change now altering the timing. But within their genetic makeup, they already feel like, okay, by August, we should start preparing to jackpot. And then it is now August and conditions have changed. So the food that would otherwise be available due to weather conditions is no longer available. So you have what we call climate mismatch. So you're having those kind of things affecting birds because for birds, reproduction is a very expensive thing. So they need food and resources to do that. And when it's not available, it means that their reproductive cycle will change. For a lot of them, they have peak periods of reproduction because it has to tally with available resources. So that's one of the impacts of climate change on some of these birds.
So we understand that there are different migration patterns.
Yeah.
Talk us through this.
Okay.
So-called migration patterns.
All right. Within Africa, for example, you have species that migrate just within Africa. And those ones follow the seasonality of rainfall, because rainfall, when you have rains, then you have increased productivity of food. And so they move from drier areas to areas of more abundance. And that's the intra-African migration. But you also have the global migration, where you have birds moving from other intercontinent-wise. So birds from Europe moving to Africa, birds from the South Americas moving to other parts of the world. So these are different kinds of migrations that exist.
So how about the birds that reside on lowlands during the winter months?
So you have all of that. For example, there are groups of birds called waders. They feed on microorganisms within the wetlands. They also migrate. So the birds that migrate do not have a single behavior. You have different kind of birds that migrate. The ones that feed on insects, the ones that feed on other smaller birds or fish that we call raptors. So different kinds of birds migrate.
Are they endangered? the migratory birds?
So some of them are endangered because their populations are declining as a result of different impacts, climate change, human activities. A few of them are highlighted, and the understanding that they are endangered comes from the work that conservationists do to monitor them year in, year out, to understand to monitor their populations, and you can tell over time that there's a change in the population size of these birds.
And what's the impact of that on our ecosystem?
Okay, so birds provide different functions to within our ecosystem and our space, from pollination to the dispersal of seeds. And it is not just the product of their activities is not enjoyed by just birds. Even humans benefit from some of these functions that birds carry out. So pollination, for example, is responsible for a lot of our fruits and food. Dispersal of seed, helps us, especially for our natural growing plants and animals. It is dispersal that is responsible for the regeneration of those. And when you lose a bird that is supposed to provide that service, then you lose that service itself. And that is the challenge. And one of the easiest ways to measure that impact is to, for example, look at plants that are pollinated by birds. If you don't have birds, what would it cost you to do that artificially? That is one way to look at what the loss of those kind of birds is to the ecosystem.
Are there any birds that migrate from the warm parts of the world to cooler regions?
Yes.
And if there are, why do they do that?
So generally, the pattern is colder parts of the world to warmer parts of the world.
Yes.
Yes. Most times you have, because you have a fairly stable condition in the warmer parts of the world, the change in temperature is not drastic. So most birds within those climes do not find it necessary to make any movement. Most times the movement is from the very cold climes to the warmer parts of the world. Yes.
Are there a lot of birds that japa?
Yes. So I'll give you an example. There is a place in Nigeria called the Hadejia Ongoro Wetlands.
What?
Wetlands. It's a wetland complex.
Yes.
So a wetland is an area that holds water almost all through the year. While the water level would change, it would always be moist. And if you go there during the peak of the winter season from October, November, December, January.
Please don't call it winter. We don't have winter in Nigeria.
Yeah, so we use that because we are celebrating this globally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so in the Harmattan period here, if you go to those areas, you can find birds that up to 20,000 within that area. All of that population have migrated from the colder parts of
different species.
Different species. Okay. In those kinds of areas.
Where exactly is this place in Nigeria, please? So
that complex is around the Jigawa, Bauchi axis, where you have the parts of it is now the Hadejia National Park. That's one of such areas that we have in Nigeria, and you see such. And even along our coastlines, you also have birds that migrate and utilize these areas during the December, January period.
You know that some of our people have a natural inclination for bushmeat. You're laughing. So, why are you laughing at you? Allow me to ask my question.
I know the question.
Who asked the question then?
Go ahead.
So, my question, I don't know what she has in mind, but my question is about the education or the awareness of the various locals in the different communities about these migratory birds and the effect of consuming them via roasting and all of those things on the ecosystem.
Yeah, so organization like the Nigeria Conservation Foundation, we do a lot of awareness in communities. We also do monitoring across communities. So we go there, we tell them what we're doing and the implication. It's not easy in a place like Nigeria where the level of education on such subjects matter is quite low. So it takes a lot. But what we do is we have different educational outreaches designed for different target groups, school children, community-based conservation education. And even in some cases, we implement projects within communities that take away from the overuse of some of these species and then that can support their livelihood sustainably. So those are part of the things that we do to try to get the message across.
Now, take us through some of the hazards that these migratory birds go through. I mean, if strange birds come into our area and they look, you know what I mean? I mean, that
It looks sumptuous.
That is obe straight away. That is soup. Particularly in Nigeria of today.
Yes. Indiscriminate killing, even not even just for soup, also happens where children, just because these birds often they move in their numbers. So at some point of the year you're surrounded by so many birds and it's just something to play with, and you even have cases of that. But you also have what you have mentioned in terms of hunting for food. So it's quite a challenge because monitoring has showed that there are declines that are arising from this kind of thing. Then you also have the issues of a changing environment. So a bird, for example, in its route will stop in certain points, feed, and then get to the final destination where it will spend a few months. But what's happening is you also have urbanization and then the emergence of human structures in certain areas. And unlike humans that have the quick ability to adjust to changes, most of these species do not have that ability. So these are some things that they kind of struggle with, and we also as researchers are still trying to understand what the long-term response would be. But in the short term, declines are being observed, and that's why days like this are being celebrated and then commemorated to raise awareness with people on the impact that we have within the environment.
Would legislation in any way help the attitude of the people towards these migratory birds?
Yeah, I think it will, and we have some sort of policies because Nigeria is signatory to some international conventions that we also domesticated to protect some of these species. So like the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species is one of the international convention that Nigeria is signatory to. We also have the conservation of African Eurasian migratory birds. And within our federal ministry, we have departments that are dedicated to this subject. And so they have a role to play in domesticating some of these international conventions. And then people like us now raise awareness on these issues while the government does the enforcement to ensure that people do not indiscriminately use the resources within our ecosystem and then endanger the functions that we benefit from them.
Well, you spoke about ministries just now, and I was just thinking, I mean, how effective is the work that they do in these ministries? Because, I mean, I'm in the media, and I don't hear much. So what about the other people who are not in this space?
In this space. So I think it's the burden of, or the burden now lies on the government to ensure that what is being done gets out there. But like the general perception is always with government is resources to be very effective can be limited. And that's why organizations like us partner with governments, understand, also advocate for the laws and also raise awareness. And working with media like you today, definitely this message is going to reach out to a lot of people. And we hope that the government, has more resources to do what they are already doing at a more effective scale.
What is the benefit of this movement to the ecosystem and to human beings? Because we're on the top of the food chain. So if it's not useful to us, then what?
Yeah, so the danger with being at the top of the food chain is that if every other thing under you collapses, you are
You are done for.
You're going to crash. But just to emphasize again some of the things I raised, a lot of the food we eat, a lot of the functions within our ecosystem, they depend on these relationships between the wildlife that share our spaces. And when we are not conscious about it, we lose them before we even understand that we are losing some of these ecological benefits that we depend on. So it's something for us to really think about and not limit to experts, but that it's a concern for everyone that benefits from the ecosystem.
What is a migrant trap?
Migrant trap. I would like you to rephrase that.
I don't know what it is. That's why I'm asking.
Well, I'm not certain that I am familiar with that.
Okay, it's an expression. Okay, all right, fine. Why do migratory birds need protection?
Yes, so I've highlighted a few of the functions that they provide, and one of the key things I would also say is birds are indicators. They tell you about the health of your ecosystem. So, for example, I've mentioned that there is a place in Nigeria where at certain points in the year you have up to 20,000 birds. And then you imagine that you go there in 1 year and you don't find that much number of birds. It tells you that there is something wrong. Mm-hmm. So, one, that ability to tell that there is something affecting our environmental space is one function that birds provide for free. They also help us to pollinate our foods. In certain climes, ecotourism, depending on birds, also brings in benefits to countries. It can be that huge. Yes, you go to East Africa and they are making money from people who travel to places where they want to see this bird in that congregating numbers, just for the excitement of it. So it can be that.
This place in Hadejia,
Yeah.
Do people go there just to see the birds?
Well, people are always there. People go there, but within the context of our country today, maybe not as much as people used to. But there are different parts of the country where bird watching is growing as a hobby and even as a research, and people are going out there to observe what is happening around them. And such movements also contribute economically to wherever it's happening. So,
let me ask you an economic question. In light of the hunger faced by many Nigerians, how safe are these birds?
Well,
see, I'm not the one that asked.
Is it not true?
So I didn't did it.
Well, I think that people just need to be aware. Really, even as hungry as we think that people are, you'll be surprised as how much they can change with the right information. Because really, that's not the only source. Okay, what of when those birds are not around you? What are you eating?
Anytime you see anyone,
but
kill it and eat it.
But people have the ability to adjust their behavior because of the work we do and the communities we engage in. When people understand, when people know, they have the ability to change their behavior, and that's some of the positive thoughts that drive the work that we do.
She has another funny question.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't.
She's
still recovering from that one.
But do you think we fully, as a people, do we fully understand how these migrating birds, how they find their flyways?
So the knowledge that we have has come from research and from monitoring these birds over the years. For centuries, monitoring has been going on around the world. So I'll give you an example. A few years ago, in a place around Ogun State called Omo Forest, somebody caught a big bird, a raptor, and found rings on its feet.
Rings?
Yes. And he was like, his village people were out to get him, and he has killed the bird. So he took the rings and he gave it to a reverend father in that vicinity. Some months later, we were there for an awareness program, and we were like, okay, there are migratory birds that utilize our spaces and all that. And there are scientists that are dedicated to studying these movements. So they ring these birds, they place these rings on these birds, so sort of giving it a name. So what they try to do is, and because these birds their routes are fairly stable, so you can go to the same place over the years and you find the same bird. So one, it tells you how the potential length of years that a bird survives. But you also have birds that have tracking devices, where people have used that to understand how they fly, their route. So that has been able to help scientists understand what we call the flyways. But to the story I was saying, so the Reverend Father came to us and said, this explanation just helps, because look at this bird that we found, and look at the ring that we found on the bird. And we were able to retrieve that, send the information. Tragically, that bird flew all the way from Finland.
Wow.
So it was ringed by one of the universities in Finland as part of the study. And so we sent them details to say, okay, we have retrieved the ring. Unfortunately, the bird was killed. It didn't die of natural causes. Those kind of things help you to understand where these birds utilize, and where to focus your efforts on when you try to do your work.
You know, to the question that she asked the other time, you know, migrant traps could be said to refer to some kind of geographical location or area where migrating birds are temporarily concentrated or halted.
Okay.
You know, so I don't know if that gives some context.
Okay, yeah, so it does. So, one word I use, for example, stopovers. So they could be, for example, the final destination of one end of your migration. So if a bird, for example, is utilizing some parts of Nigeria during the winter, 4 or 5 months of winter, then that is its trap. In some cases, it could be where you're stopping to refuel. So when you do the studies of these birds that migrate, one thing you observe is they take in a lot of food before they migrate. But as they also travel, they stop at certain points to refuel.
We understand that the red knot has one of the longest total migration routes of any bird. Talk us through this route, especially as it passes through our region. We understand it has the total migration route traveling up to about 16,000 kilometers twice a year.
Yes.
Wow.
16,000 kilometers. Imagine what you would pay to get that mileage. Yeah, but
how much fuel?
But yes, this is how far some of these birds travel. And within our Earth, there are routes that have been identified. We call them migratory routes, flyways, and different countries around that region are called the countries within that flyway. And so you have species like the red knots. But what they do before they fly is they eat a lot of food. They stack up, and visibly when you hold,
like camels do to water when they're moving.
So visibly when you hold them and you blow open their chest, you would actually see a physical storage of fat there, and then that is what they use as fuel all through their journey. They can stop over inside to take water, take additional food until they get to where they are settling down as their station for that period. where it is not suitable for them to be in their breeding area. And then the same thing happens when they are returning. When it's time to return, they also stack up a lot of food to have energy to make that kind of journey. And so that's sort of a picture of what the migratory journey for a bird looks like.
Well, we seem to be stretching you on this matter, but now you've talked about laws, policies, and all those things. But how about the responsibility of states? I'm talking about the federal government and state governments. Now, if you would say a government agency or ministry or department has a responsibility, would it be the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of the Environment in any state?
In any state. So I think it's different for states, depending on where they've allocated that responsibility. So for example, in Ogun State, for example, where we work on species, not just birds, generally species conservation, we work with the Ministry of Forestry. Conservation forms part of their core mandate. And sometimes we also work with environments, because for each state, I think they just do what works for them, and we tag along with whatever is working with the state. In Lagos State, I think it's environment, and they have a Department of Agriculture that is split into conservation as well. And because we also partner with state governments, federal governments, and so depending on what is applicable within a state, that's what we work with. And the states now has that responsibility to domesticate what the federal government is signed to.
Now, in the same context, again, just a little diversion or digression. Let's talk about endangered species, because it will be in the space of endangerment. That's why I asked that question around the risks. That we ask questions around the risks that these birds have to go through. So talk us through some of the endangered species, and primarily, if as people, federal, state, local governments, we are conscious enough of the risks of this endangerment.
Okay, that's a very important question and conversation to always have when we're discussing conservation, because that is what we try to prevent, that species within our ecosystem do not get to the point where we don't have them anymore. You have population declines, and when they become drastic, it means that the species, no matter how they reproduce, because the original population has lost its viability, it continues to decline until it disappears totally, and that's what we call extinction. So that's what this kind of program helps us to raise awareness on. The cumulative effects of whether climate change, anthropogenic activities, hunting, and destruction of the habitat, all of that is what impacts this population of species. And whether for migratory species or for resident species, you have the danger that now drives them to the point of being either extinct or endangered, depending on the category. As a people, it is something that we are not so conscious of, but it is what we are trying to change, so that we are observant of what is happening around us. It's not just animals or birds, even plants go extinct because you have urbanization or the loss of natural forests and green spaces. And what happens is there is no intentionality in protecting these places for these species. So what organisms like birds do for you is that they now tell you that while our numbers are declining, it shows that even within the ecosystem, other things are also declining, possibly, either in size or in quality, And there are also days dedicated to, awareness on endangered species.
Is there a way to systemize this awareness, so it's not just something that happens occasionally, such as we're having it now? Here is why. Not too long ago, some of our people in various localities saw some big fish by the riverbank. And they said the gods have blessed them. And they butchered, They butchered it and all of that.
And then remember the turtle.
Yes. Meanwhile, there is another, community, perhaps a more enlightened or, community. They saw that rather than butcher it and kill it and eat it, they pushed it back into the sea.
Yeah.
So is there a way to protect ourselves by expanding this whole awareness thing? That's why I'm asking about the states and about the local, communities.
Yeah. So, yes, on days like this, a lot of us, people like us, are in different places talking. But every day, this is the work that we do. So we're in communities, we are talking to government, we are sending them evidences of what we're recording on the field. We're working with local communities that are very within the proximate, environment with some of these species, raising awareness with them. So we do this every day, but we want it to be more out there. So the government has its role to play, no doubt. They have a lot to do, because whatever we do, whatever scale we are working, if the government takes it up, then it's going to be much more amplified. But we keep doing what we do, and then we also work with media houses like you to also help raise that message to Nigerians, for us to understand that everything is not. It doesn't have to be food. There are even severe cases where it's a dead animal, for example, that has been washed ashore. You don't know what has happened to it. You don't know how it died, and people are eating it. So even for the sake of, people's health, it's very dire.
Since we're talking about birds, I served in Jos. So, and at that time, there were vultures everywhere. And then I think it was on this program, we heard one of your people came and told us that there's a depletion, in the number of vultures in that area, that people are now seeing them as food. What is the position now?
I'm afraid not good. And it's not just Jos. It's all over Nigeria. So even if you talk to people around abattoirs, for example, they'll tell you how years ago, even a few years ago, you had vultures everywhere. And once you go to the abattoirs and all that, but it's different now. We have almost around 95% decline in our vulture populations. Just a few places.
95?
Yes. So, for example, in Jos, there's an institute in the University of Jos, the AP Leventis Ornithological Research Institute in Jos. They do a lot of monitoring in collaboration with us in the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. And the situation is the same. Where you would have hundreds of vultures, now you have 2, 3 that you see quite rarely.
What?
And the story is the same, even in the southwest.
Sorry, please. Who eats vultures?
So it's not just food.
Okay.
It's not just food. Vultures are also used in traditional medicine practice.
Vulture. Go on.
So they're also used in traditional medicine practice. So if you go to wildlife markets around Nigeria, you'd find vulture, either live or vulture parts in markets being sold for that purpose. You also have habitat destruction, because many of these large birds, they require very huge trees as their shelter. And then you have all of this deforestation going on. So all of that is impacting, the population nationwide, and even globally, really.
So if the natural scavengers are being killed, what is happening to things that they scavenge on normally?
Normally. So that is now so what we now have is a loss of a niche provider, and research in other parts of the world has shown that kind of decline can lead to an increase in infectious diseases among people. So these are the cases that we also highlight through the work that we do.
So where do we go from here?
So this year's theme for the World Migratory Bird Day, it's simple, that we build bird-friendly communities. And it's not strange for us, even within our own cultural practice, where you have, in the past, people building a house and you would have a tree Could be as simple as something like that. But what we have these days is the emergence of sprawling estates, and you can go meters, hundreds of meters without sighting a single tree. So the message here is simple and clear. Within our homes, within our emerging estates, within our spaces, let's be intentional about having green spaces. It is not just when they support birds, that's not the end of it. They also provide different services. We have the issues of climate change, which is exacerbated because we're losing our natural forest, our trees and all that. So when we do that, we're also contributing to the recovery of the ecosystem. So when we provide bird-friendly communities, we'll be doing much more than supporting birds, but we'll also be enjoying our lives better.
How do we take this to young people? Because you know there is a special way to communicate with them.
We have different ways of engaging young people. Like today on social media, there's a lot of awareness also going on about the World Migratory Bird Day. And young people are getting into the environment as well because they're getting more conscious about their mental health, and people are understanding that you actually need nature in some cases, you know, to make you feel better. But I think we continue to try to do more. There's always more to do.
Madam, we have to thank you very much for your time this morning. Dr. Stella Egbe is Senior Conservation Manager, Species Programs, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. We thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.